The neon lights of West 7th District painted the night in electric blues and reds. Bars pulsed with music, college students drifted between sidewalks and street corners, the promise of tomorrow resting easy on their shoulders. But for one young man, tomorrow would never come. A promising student with a bright future, a Friday night out with friends, and a moment when the world should have felt safe. Yet somewhere in the shadows, danger waited, silent, watchful, ready to turn an ordinary night into a nightmare. In a matter of seconds, a decision was made. And as the sun rose hours later, a family's world lay shattered, a campus stood in shock, and a city was left asking one haunting question: why? This isn't just a story of one life lost, but of a collision between innocence and darkness that no one saw coming. Stay with us, as we uncover what really happened on that warm Texas night. Friday, September 1, 2023. The West 7th District in Fort Worth was alive with weekend anticipation. Under the neon haze, crowds spilled onto sidewalks, the pulse of music mixing with car horns and laughter. College students, young professionals, and locals moved from bar to bar, each moment feeling like an ordinary night of celebration. As the evening drifted into early morning, the district's energy shifted. By 1 a.m., lines at late-night food trucks grew longer, conversations grew louder, and the first signs of fatigue and tipsiness settled over the crowd. By 1:30 a.m., ride-sharing cars crowded street corners. Drivers waited as people staggered to curbs, hugging friends goodbye before heading home. The scent of spilt drinks lingered on warm sidewalks. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance. At 1:45 a.m., one young man helped his friends find their car, smiling, perhaps thinking about his plans for the weekend, unaware that every second brought him closer to a life-changing encounter. Just minutes before 2 a.m., amidst the thinning crowds and fading echoes of music, paths crossed that never should have met. In an ordinary moment, something extraordinary and horrifying was set in motion. What happened next would turn a bustling district into a crime scene and transform a night of joy into a lasting nightmare. To understand what led to this tragedy, we must go back to the beginning, to the choices, the chance encounters, and the hidden darkness waiting to erupt. Before that night on West 7th, before the echoes of gunfire and the flashing lights, there was simply Wes. A son, a friend, a teammate, and a young man whose story began far from the neon glare of a Fort Worth bar. Wesley James Smith was born in 2002, in a quiet Texas town where front porches still held evening conversations and neighbors knew each other's names. His childhood was shaped by strong family bonds. His mother, a teacher who nurtured curiosity, his father, a coach who taught discipline and resilience. From his earliest days, Wes radiated determination. He was the boy who stayed late after football practice, the student who offered to tutor classmates struggling in math, the friend who'd drive across town at midnight if he needed a ride. In middle school, coaches noticed his quiet leadership. He didn't bark orders, he inspired with example. Teachers wrote home about his kindness and focus. His father told a story of a game where Wes took a brutal hit but got up, refusing to let his team down. His mother called him "my steady rock," always ready to listen, always ready to help. Academically, Wes was equally relentless. He balanced sports and studies with a maturity beyond his years, graduating high school with honors. Coaches described him as someone who never cut corners. Friends said he made hard work look effortless. When it came time to choose a college, Wes set his heart on Texas Christian University. He walked onto the TCU football team without a scholarship, determined to prove himself. He spent his first year on the scout team, taking hits from starting players, never complaining. Eventually, he shifted focus to finance, driven by a dream of helping his parents retire early and building a legacy of his own. Friends recall Wes as someone who lit up every room. His fraternity brothers told stories of late-night conversations where Wes listened more than he spoke, always offering a word of encouragement or a joke to break the tension. A classmate remembered him skipping his own birthday dinner to help her finish a group project. To his parents, he was their greatest pride. To his friends, their loyal confidant. To his coaches, the player they wished every team was made of. But underneath all the promise, there was something none of them could see. A storm brewing on the edges of Wes's life, something waiting in the shadows beyond even his reach. Everyone who met Wes said the same thing: he was going places. And yet, on a night that should have ended in laughter, the future they all imagined for him slipped away in an instant. How could a life filled with so much light end in the dark? And what forces collided to take it all away? Long before Matthew Purdy stepped onto the neon streets of Fort Worth that night, his story was already spiraling toward disaster. His childhood began in a neighborhood where opportunity was scarce, but violence was never far away. Cracked sidewalks led past boarded windows, the hum of police radios echoed through humid summer nights. Purdy grew up in a fractured home. His father left when he was still learning to tie his shoes, leaving a mother who struggled with addiction and relationships marked by chaos. Teachers described him as a boy who rarely smiled, often staring into space as lessons carried on around him. He changed schools several times, each move pushing him further from stability. By middle school, fights became his language of choice. He was suspended repeatedly, first for shoving, then for threats, then for striking a teacher who tried to break up an altercation. Neighbors remember a boy who would throw rocks at cars and pick fights in alleys. A social worker's notes described him as withdrawn, distrustful, and prone to sudden rage. In his teenage years, Purdy drifted deeper into crime. Misdemeanor arrests escalated to felonies, burglary, aggravated assault. By 21 he was already on probation for an armed robbery, a sentence that many would later argue should have kept him off the streets. Was it the violence of his neighborhood that shaped him, or something darker inside him waiting to break free? Purdy's social circle only deepened his rage. Friends, if they could be called that, were mostly acquaintances who shared drugs and stories of petty crime. They described him as moody, sometimes eerily calm before sudden bursts of anger. One former classmate recalled, "You could tell he didn't care about consequences. It was like he wanted chaos." Teachers and neighbors alike saw the signs. A child left to his own devices, a teen whose home life was filled with shouting matches, a young man convinced the world was stacked against him. But despite interventions, counseling referrals, juvenile detentions, the cycle only deepened. His mother, exhausted by years of conflict, eventually moved away, leaving Purdy to drift through couches and cheap motels. Those who knew him then say he was spiraling, a short fuse waiting for a spark. Purdy's past shows a man who believed violence was a solution, but why did he snap that night? What unseen forces turned his rage toward a stranger he'd never met? In the quiet moments before that fateful encounter, no one, not Purdy, not his acquaintances, not even the strangers walking past him, knew how close they stood to tragedy. September 1, 2023. Just before midnight, the West 7th District buzzed with the electric energy of a Texas weekend. Streetlights burned like halos over crowded sidewalks, the thump of bass beats drifted through open bar doors, and friends clung to each other, unwilling to let the night end. For Wes Smith, the evening began with laughter. He met friends at a popular sports bar on Crockett Street. They ordered wings and cold drinks, sharing stories of tough classes and future plans. Cameras caught Wes raising a glass, his smile unguarded and full of life. By 12:30 a.m., the group spilled into the humid night air, debating whether to catch a ride home or walk to another bar. Wes, always the responsible one, checked on each friend, who had keys, who had too much to drink, who needed a lift. At the same time, on a parallel path just blocks away, Matthew Purdy drifted through the district's shadows. Witnesses later described him as agitated and restless, pacing sidewalks alone. Security footage showed him loitering outside multiple bars without going inside, eyes scanning crowds with an intensity that made some patrons uncomfortable. As the clock struck 1:40 a.m., Wes and his friends decided it was time to head home. They began the slow walk toward their parked car. Unbeknownst to them, Purdy's path curved ever closer. Minute by minute, fate drew two lives toward a single intersection. At 1:45 a.m., Wes paused under a bright street lamp, scanning the lot for his friend's SUV. His laughter echoed softly, carried away by a warm breeze. Purdy, standing across the street, watched, eyes narrowed, his hands buried deep in his pockets. Nearby, a doorman noticed Purdy pacing, head darting left and right as though looking for something, or someone. Patrons stepping outside for fresh air described him muttering to himself, posture rigid. As Wes and his friends finally spotted their car around 1:48 a.m., they quickened their pace. But at the same moment, Purdy stepped off the curb, crossing diagonally through the near-empty intersection. His eyes were locked on Wes, his movement purposeful. Witnesses would later say they felt a chill when Purdy approached, like the air itself had shifted. And then, a strange question cut through the humid silence. "Is your father here?" Purdy asked Wes, his voice low, almost casual. Wes hesitated, confused. His friends exchanged puzzled glances, trying to decipher what this stranger wanted. A single heartbeat seemed to stretch forever. Behind them, the music from a nearby club faded into silence. Even the passing traffic seemed to stall in time. In those final minutes before 2 a.m., a dangerous calm settled over West 7th. Two lives stood suspended, one filled with promise, the other with darkness. Neither Wes nor his friends could have known they were standing at the threshold of a nightmare, and that the night's silence was about to be shattered forever. The silence of West 7th was deceptive. Seconds ticked by like lifetimes as Wes and his friends stood frozen in confusion. The stranger's question, "Is your father here?" lingered like an echo against the concrete walls. Then, with terrifying speed, everything changed. At exactly 1:59 a.m., 3 sharp cracks split the night, sounds that witnesses later described as like fireworks, but with a heaviness that made hearts stop. In those heartbeats, the unthinkable unfolded. Wes collapsed onto the cold pavement, his friends screaming as they dove for cover. The surreal quiet that had hung in the air was replaced by chaos, shouted prayers, hurried footsteps, phones fumbling to dial 911. Nearby, a teenage boy who witnessed the scene tried to flee, but Purdy turned his rage on him, pistol whipping him as he ran. It was a moment of violence so raw, so sudden, that even seasoned police officers arriving on scene would later say it felt unreal. Emergency dispatchers relayed panicked voices. "He's been shot, he's not moving." Sirens grew louder, their wails rising over the confusion and horror. Officers arrived within minutes, guns drawn, shouting commands into the night. Witnesses pointed to a man still moving erratically between cars. Matthew Purdy. He had fired his last round, but the terror he left behind would ripple through families, friends, and an entire city. As medics rushed to Wes's side, his friends stood paralyzed, torn between disbelief and despair. The road was littered with dropped cell phones and scattered shoes, silent witnesses to a life violently interrupted. Some described those moments as feeling outside of time, where reality bent and everything else fell away except the struggle to save a young man's life. And then, as quickly as it began, the night settled again, but the silence that followed was different. It was a silence thick with grief, shock, and questions that no one could yet answer. In a matter of seconds, one life was gone. Another was in handcuffs. And a community was left to reckon with the horror of a random act of violence on a night that should have ended in laughter. In the hours after shots rang out, Fort Worth police set to work reconstructing a night that seemed to make no sense. Detectives canvassed bars and clubs, interviewing dozens of witnesses who'd seen flashes of chaos but struggled to understand why. Security footage emerged from multiple angles, dark, grainy recordings showing a lone figure pacing, crossing intersections and moments of confrontation. Each new video helped investigators establish a minute-by-minute timeline of Matthew Purdy's movements and Wes Smith's final moments. Detectives pieced together a troubling portrait. Purdy had arrived in West 7th alone and appeared agitated from the start. Witnesses described him muttering, scanning crowds, and exhibiting signs of paranoia. Officers traced his path through the district with footage showing him wandering aimlessly, until he locked onto Wes. Interviews with Wes's friends confirmed what seemed impossible. There was no argument, no scuffle, no provocation. The confrontation had been a brief, confusing question, then sudden violence. Investigators began to ask, was this random or did Purdy harbor a motive no one had seen coming? Forensic teams worked through the night, cataloging shell casings, photographing every footprint, swabbing surfaces for DNA. Early toxicology suggested Purdy had been under the influence, intensifying speculation about what state of mind led him to pull the trigger. By sunrise, Purdy was booked into the Tarrant County Jail. He faced a single but overwhelming charge, murder. As his mugshot spread across social media, the community's shock turned to outrage, and calls for answers grew louder. Detectives uncovered Purdy's extensive criminal history, prior felonies, probation status, violent altercations stretching back to his teens. How was he free that night? The question echoed through news broadcasts and online forums alike. The DA's office moved quickly, charging Purdy with first-degree murder. Prosecutors described the case as unprovoked, senseless, and deeply tragic. Bond was denied. In every courtroom hearing that followed, Wes's family sat in silent agony, each appearance a reminder of the loss they could never undo. As weeks turned into months, the community rallied behind Wes's loved ones. Candlelight vigils lit up the TCU campus. Purple ribbons appeared on doors and car windows in his honor. And while investigators closed the case quickly, the larger question lingered. Could the tragedy have been prevented? In the weeks following Wes Smith's death, the community's grief evolved into a fierce determination to see justice served. The courthouse became a gathering place. Reporters, classmates, and family members waited for every new development. Each hearing carried an air of unbearable tension. Matthew Purdy's first court appearance came only days after his arrest. Shackled and silent, he stood before the judge as prosecutors outlined the charge: first-degree murder. The room fell quiet as the details were read aloud: a random act, unprovoked, devastating. In pretrial motions, defense attorneys hinted at possible mental health issues. But prosecutors pushed back forcefully, arguing that Purdy's past crimes showed a pattern of violence, not a moment of illness. Expert witnesses reviewed his criminal record, highlighting his probation status at the time of the shooting. In emotional victim impact statements, Wes's parents described their son's ambition, his warmth, and the unbearable hole left in their lives. Friends spoke of the last text messages they received, their voices cracking as they remembered how ordinary that night had seemed until everything changed. After months of hearings and plea negotiations, Purdy entered a guilty plea in exchange for avoiding a trial. The courtroom was silent as the judge pronounced his fate: 60 years in prison with no possibility of parole until decades into the sentence. For Wes's family, it was a bittersweet moment, a measure of justice, yet no sentence could return the life they lost. Outside the courthouse, his mother held a photo of Wes, thanking supporters for standing by them during the darkest days. Local leaders spoke of systemic failures, how someone with a violent history slipped through the cracks, free to walk the streets. Legislators proposed new laws to tighten oversight of violent offenders on probation. Students at TCU founded scholarships in Wes's name, determined that his legacy would mean something beyond heartbreak. Justice was done in the courtroom, but for many, the deeper wounds remain. The question of how a promising night spiraled into a nightmare still echoes in the halls of a grieving community. When the courtroom doors closed and the cameras turned away, the true aftermath of Wes Smith's death unfolded quietly, in dorm rooms, family kitchens, and the hearts of everyone who knew him. At Texas Christian University, Wes's fraternity brothers gathered to share stories. Laughter mixed with tears as they remembered late-night talks about careers, relationships, and the future he would never see. Professors kept Wes's seat open for weeks after his death. On his birthday, classmates laid flowers across the desk, a quiet tribute to the friend who once made them laugh on the hardest days. The Smith family, determined that Wes's spirit wouldn't fade, created the Wesley James Smith Memorial Scholarship. Its mission: to lift future TCU students who embody his kindness and dedication. The community's grief turned into action. Purple ribbons, Wes's favorite color, appeared on lampposts, cars, and backpacks. Local businesses donated proceeds to the scholarship. On social media, thousands shared memories of Wes with the hashtag #LiveLikeWes. Meanwhile, local leaders used Wes's story to push for reforms: tougher oversight of probation violations, expanded support for youth in violent communities, and renewed focus on mental health interventions. His death became a catalyst for conversations too long ignored. For those who knew Wes, his absence is a wound that may never fully heal. But his life, one of generosity, ambition, and love, left behind ripples of hope that continue to spread. Through every scholarship awarded, every conversation about safety and justice, Wes's name lives on as a reminder: a single life, no matter how brief, can change countless others. Tonight, you've walked alongside a life full of promise, and witnessed how a single act of violence shattered countless hearts. Wes Smith's story is more than a headline. It's a call to remember those we've lost, to support those who grieve, and to fight for communities where safety isn't a privilege but a right. What can you do right now? Honor Wes's memory by sharing his story, because awareness brings change. Subscribe to this channel for more true crime documentaries that don't just retell tragedies but seek understanding and solutions. Comment below: what do you think needs to change so we never have to tell another story like Wes's? Your voice matters. And if this documentary moved you, please like this video. It helps keep stories like Wes's in the public eye. Together, we can ensure Wes's legacy is more than what was lost, but a reason to keep moving forward with love, with hope, and with determination to make our world safer for everyone.